All right, so Bitcoin is on the top of the news today. It, of course, is starting to hit a lot more than just investors that are moving into Bitcoin. Now we're talking about major companies that are really kind of jumping into the space. And joining me today is, of course, none other than Michael Saylor. Great to have you on the show, the CEO and co-founder of MicroStrategy. Great to have you.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. Michael, let's get into a little bit about what's happening really around businesses that have made some pretty dynamic moves here just in the past few months. That being Tesla being pretty much the poster child of this little move here, converting their treasury into Bitcoin, and now just yesterday releasing in their app that you can actually buy a Tesla with Bitcoin. So kind of your thoughts. I think you were one of the catalysts of this whole thing with your challenge out there to Elon. Kind of tell me where you think this is going.
Well, I think this is part of the digital transformation of balance sheets across industry. Bitcoin's been going up at 200% on average over the course of a decade, but in the past 6 months, it's up 500%.
Right.
And so it's an appreciating asset in a macroeconomic environment where the currency is being inflated at anywhere from 15 to 20%. So corporate treasuries that are holding cash are holding a depreciating asset. Tesla is just a leader in converting some of that balance sheet to Bitcoin. There's obviously a huge amount of enthusiasm for anything Bitcoin related. And so by Tesla announcing they're accepting Bitcoin as payment, I think that was a great legitimizing action that's going to cause many other companies to think about doing the same thing. But the more important part of the announcement is that Tesla announced that if you pay them in Bitcoin, they're not going to convert it back into dollars. They're going to hold it on their balance sheet as Bitcoin.
Right.
As you can imagine, if I give you $100,000 in Bitcoin and it doubles every 6 months, which is what it has been doing for the past decade, then the single most important thing would be I'm investing $100,000 in an asset that I expect to double 20 times over the next decade, or
right.
many times. And so that's really the critical part of this news.
Yeah, when you look at what Tesla is doing, we've studied Dojo on this channel before, which is their supercomputer that eventually is going to be handling all things AI, autonomy, et cetera. But there's been some indication from Elon that maybe this computer is going to be looking for other things to do. So it could potentially look at an algorithm that could lever against the sale of a vehicle that a Bitcoin was used to purchase, to maybe even reduce, and almost, in essence, giving a discount if you purchase by Bitcoin because their value is going to go up. Do you think that is a strategy that some companies could start to employ?
I think the announcement was exciting because Tesla indicated they're running their own Bitcoin nodes, and I think that contributes to the security of the network.
Right.
And generally, most Bitcoin mining is done off of SHA-256 ASICs, which are pretty special purpose devices. Right. Tesla's an innovative company, so anything's possible, but I think the primary news here is Tesla's running Bitcoin nodes, Tesla's accepting Bitcoin, and Tesla's hodling Bitcoin for the long term.
Yeah, for sure. When you look at other companies that could make this kind of shift, especially in the transaction side of things, because that's been kind of the knock on Bitcoin for a lot of people, is that, can I use it to start to buy things? If someone like an Amazon were to actually move in this direction, do you think Amazon would be another player that would go in this direction? And if so, what kind of implications do you think that would set?
Well, I think taking payment in Bitcoin for big ticket items makes more sense than small ticket items. But I really don't think that Bitcoin needs to be the day-to-day transaction mechanism, and so I think that's an old antiquated idea. I think generally, if you want to buy things that are between $2 and a few $1,000s, people will generally pay for them in dollars and euros on conventional currency rails like MasterCard and Visa. The critical thing that's going on here, which is a million times more important than anything else, is you pay me in anything, I convert it to Bitcoin and I hold it. If I convert $1 million into Bitcoin and I hold it for a decade, it keeps doubling and doubling and doubling. So $1 million might be worth $100 million to the shareholders. That's the critical thing. So what's going to really have an impact on the marketplace is as companies like Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple, start to buy Bitcoin or hold Bitcoin on their balance sheets. That'll be good for their shareholders. That'll be good for Bitcoin, right? That will drive the industry forward. It doesn't need to be the day-to-day medium of exchange. It is in some cases. I mean, look, in a country where MasterCard and Visa don't function and the currency's collapsed,
right?
Then you're going to use some kind of payment rail, probably a stable coin on the Lightning Network backed by Bitcoin. But in countries where euros and dollars function properly on MasterCard and Visa and normal payment networks, then the really critical thing here is for companies to start to convert their treasuries to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin as a treasury asset is yielding 200% more than the next best idea. That's the key idea.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so with a company that is as high profile as Tesla, really, publicly traded, obviously they've got shareholders to answer to, and kind of that court of public opinion as to what they're doing with their treasury, or in some cases, my investment as an investor in Tesla. Do you think that companies that are publicly traded could potentially at some point face any kind of backlash with the advancement of more and more treasury into Bitcoin?
I think that as more and more companies adopt Bitcoin as a treasury asset, there'll be more pressure on other companies to do it.
Yeah.
If you have $10 billion invested in dollars, you're getting zero yield, and the dollar is losing 15% of its purchasing power a year.
Right.
If you have $10 billion invested in Bitcoin and it doubles every year, you're going to have $100 billion worth of shareholder value in a few years, right? So if I was a shareholder, I'd rather have the $100 billion in 5 years than have $2 billion in 5 years. It's a $98 billion difference, right? You're literally destroying 98% of shareholder value by one strategy versus the other.
Sure.
So I think there'll be pressure. At least people start to think about it. It takes a while for large institutions to adopt new ideas. So it's not like I think they'll all change what they're doing overnight, but it's a rational thing to do, and you can't expect rational companies to stay irrational forever.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The eventual evolution of these companies definitely could be moving in this direction. Do you think there is a number or a percentage, I should say, of your treasury that you would say this is a good position? I know you guys at MicroStrategies are all in on Bitcoin, but for a company like Tesla, who does have to have access to liquid capital and being able to build gigafactories, cars, et cetera, how much of treasury could we commit out if you were looking at, and this is, let's take a Tesla, but also maybe a smaller company that could also be looking at this direction?
Look, companies, if they're rational and they understood Bitcoin, they would just convert it all to Bitcoin.
Get it all in there.
Because if you had $10 billion and you converted it all to Bitcoin, it would have, if Tesla had done that 2 months ago, they already would have made another $10 billion by now.
Yeah.
And you could have gone and borrowed another $20 billion against it, or $10 billion against it. So you would literally have infinite money, right?
Yeah.
If you had $1 billion in capital and you convert 5%, it's a hedge. But if you have $1 billion in capital and you convert it all, you can go and borrow any amount of money against the underlying Bitcoin at 5% interest. So it's really a misnomer to say that the companies need the cash in their hands in order to run their operations. Most companies need about 5% of their treasury as working capital.
Yeah.
So my answer would be figure out what your working capital is, like what you need every month or what you're going to need month by month over the course of the next year with a 98% probability. For us, that's $50 million. And then put the rest into a digital asset like Bitcoin, which is a treasury reserve asset, which is going to appreciate instead of depreciate.
Right.
And then if you ever want any extra capital, the simplest thing to do is just borrow either against the asset or just against your other assets, because all these companies have, almost infinite ability to borrow capital at, the junk bond rate is
very
4%,
low rate.
5%. So yeah, I mean that's unsecured debt, and so Bitcoin's yielding 200% before the financial crisis, so the pandemic. It's yielding 400 to 500% after the pandemic. You can borrow money at 4%.
Yeah.
So it really comes
no-brainer.
down to a question of why would you invest your money at 0% instead of at 400% or 200%? Or you want to be conservative, okay, we'll cut it by a factor of 10. Why would you invest your money at 0% instead of 20%?
Yeah.
Right? There's no good reason other than inertia and tradition.
Yeah. With your investment or MicroStrategy's investment, obviously the strategy began a couple of years ago for you. When you look at where you guys are positioned now and accelerating, you kind of mentioned this a second ago, and that is any kind of US dollar currency that you're taking in, you're getting into a conversion as quickly as possible. That kind of approach is, where do you see this from a speculative nature? Where do you see this going in the next, say, 1 year to 5 years for your own position?
Well, our strategy is we sweep our cash flows from local currencies, euros, dollars, yen, won, real, pesos. We sweep them into Bitcoin, and we just hold the Bitcoin forever. And right now we have in excess of $5 billion worth of Bitcoin, and we have $50 million of working capital in US dollar accounts. So we're literally 1% is sitting in fiat currency or local working capital. And as we go forward, if we see opportunities to raise equity or debt under accretive terms to our shareholders, then we do that to buy Bitcoin, or we convert existing cash flows into Bitcoin, where in essence we're converting cash that would yield zero into an asset that's yielding, you fill in the blank, the 10-year number over 10 years is like 203%, right? So it's a very simple strategy. I think that other companies are discovering it. I think you see there are a lot of Bitcoin miners right now that are announcing that they're hodling the Bitcoin. They're not going to sell it. They're going to hold it. And then there are even some that have issued equity to buy Bitcoin.
Interesting. Okay.
And I think you see the same thing with other companies in the industry. The hardest thing to do is to decide to own any Bitcoin in the first place. But as soon as you get comfortable with Bitcoin as a digital monetary network and a digital treasury asset, then you go from 1% to 5% to 10%, to more. And I just think that'll be a gradual progressive adoption.
Yeah. For sure. When you look at the companies, I'm going to give you a list of them here. If you were trying to predict which one might make the next big move in terms of converting treasury. But if you look at companies like Microsoft, obviously they've got a lot of retail products. They're a little bit higher in price. I'm selling computers. Potentially I take Bitcoin in for all my Surface products. A company like Apple, obviously that's kind of a no-brainer, I would think. And then you get into, we had kind of mentioned Amazon, but maybe even down into the microcurrencies where Starbucks might fall, which is a lot more daily transactions, but because their consumer base is so digital and forward thinking, that might be a potential play for that every day, especially in the app. What any of those companies kind of think, hey, there might be one here?
I think that Bitcoin's the most disruptive technology of our lifetime because you're in essence watching the digital transformation of assets from analog assets that are inflating to a deflationary digital asset. For sure. Every single company with a lot of money could do it. The ones most likely to do it are the ones with CEOs and shareholders that are very digital friendly. Yeah. They understand digital transformation. So the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples, the Amazons, the Microsofts, they understand digital transformation. And so they get it. They will be much more likely to get it sooner. But the other part of this is that there's a P&L strategy. If you're a company that's doing fintech like Square or PayPal, sure, you're in essence selling a mobile payment application. When you bolt on Bitcoin to it, you basically bolt on a savings account that yields 200% tax-free interest. Yeah. So the real competitive dynamic here is if Square is going to offer you a 200% savings account, PayPal's got to follow. And if PayPal's going to do it, then Apple Pay and Facebook and Google and Amazon, they stare at it. It makes a lot of sense for any fintech company that has a mobile communications app or a mobile payment app to plug into Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the king of the digital assets. And what you're doing is you're turbocharging your product offering, which means that if I've got the mobile payment application plugged into Bitcoin, I'm going to get millions of new customers a month, potentially. And we've seen that. We saw with Robinhood, we see with Square, we see with PayPal. There are literally millions of customers and billions of dollars of capital that's moving to the companies that support the new digital monetary network. So I think that you ought to look toward the digital mobile companies that either have an operating system or a device or a digital payment network, because they're the ones that have the most to gain. They're the ones that have the most to lose, and they're the ones that are most sensitive with the shareholders that are looking for them to be leaders in this space.
Which clearly puts Apple and Google right at the crosshairs of this as a potential next move. It's going to be interesting too, because I think as we start to see a lot of this development, I think you're right in the sense that Tesla could be just the tipping point of the dominoes really starting to move in this direction, which will really take kind of an interesting aspect towards companies using Treasury in a very creative ways.